One of the most enduring cliche things about Pokemon is that you've got to catch them all, obviously. It's an adage that I, as a small child, really wanted to take seriously. I didn't really understand that that was kind of, optional slash aspirational for probably too long. I assumed that that was the ultimate goal of a Pokemon game, and so I was setting out on my mission to catch every single one of them. The Pokemon League, saving the world, beating the shit out of Barry, who I named after my cousin for some reason, all of that was secondary to just completing the Pokedex. However, Pokemon doesn't make that easy. At a bare minimum, to get all the Pokemon in a single generation, you'd either need to have a copy of every version of every mainline game released for that generation, or you'd need friends who play the other versions so you could trade for version exclusives. As someone with no friends, this meant that I would have to play through the games at least twice to get everything if I wanted them. And since a ton of Pokemon can only be evolved via trading, that also meant borrowing my sister's DS to trade them back and forth. The big challenge here for everyone is usually legendaries though, because version exclusive legendaries aren't something your friends are going to want to hand over even if you do have them. They might trade them to you for a second, but the expectation is that you're given that shit back. My first generation was Gen 4, which came with the added hurdles of stuff like needing to get all 3 of the Regis to get Regigigas, which can't be obtained in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum without a special event. So you'll need another game from a previous generation to catch them and then bring them forward. You also have fun roaming Pokemon, who I basically never caught as a kid because I couldn't really figure out their whole deal, and I was not good at using anything that didn't deal damage. However, the worst offenders by far are mythical Pokemon. For people who aren't Pokemon nerds and or don't hold a decades-long grudge about this, mythical Pokemon used to be treated basically as being in the same class of Pokemon as legendaries outside of Japan. They were just rare Pokemon you'd be lucky to encounter even one of. As of Gen 5, they were officially split off into their own category, which is defined by one simple characteristic. Namely, you cannot catch them naturally in a mainline game. Typically, mythical Pokemon are either distributed via an in-person event, an online event, or a spin-off game, and occasionally the existence of one game save data on the same console will unlock them in another game as well. Now, I've hated the whole concept of mythical Pokemon for basically as long as I've played Pokemon games, but to be clear, it's not because I hate the Pokemon themselves. In fact, a lot of my favorites are and were mythical Pokemon. I hate the event-only distribution model, both because it meant that I, a child growing up in rural Alberta, could basically never access them legitimately, and also because it meant that my favorite Pokemon were often just wholly irrelevant to everything and anything outside of the movies, and that sucks. So that's what I want to yell about today. Time to unload some childhood baggage on all of you. Part 1. What am I even mad about? When I was a kid, the mythical Pokemon on offer were Mew, Celebi, Jirachi, Deoxys, Manaphy, Fione, Darkrai, Shaman, and Arceus. Now, when I say on offer, please understand that I mean that they weren't on offer to me for the most part. I lived in rural Alberta, and the closest big city to me, Edmonton, was a day trip if we wanted to go there. In-person distributions usually only happened in big cities, but also keep in mind Edmonton was under 1 million people at the time, so it obviously wasn't on the list for any big events. This is a big grievance for me, but also just for a lot of people in my area. For my non-Canadian audience members, when people talk about doing a North American tour, these are the cities they mean. It's Toronto, Vancouver, maybe Montreal. If it's a Canadian tour, you'll probably get either Calgary or Edmonton, but rarely both. And they're 3 hours apart, so whichever one they pick, it's going to matter to you. The most you could realistically hope for was a nationwide chain being part of some sort of promotion, I don't know, maybe you could pick something up at an EB Games or something, but even then, that meant a lot of travel that I couldn't realistically do as a child. Maybe some only children could wrangle this, but I have 3 siblings, and all 4 of us played hockey as kids, so good luck finding a couple spare hours to head up to and then back from the city, even if someone with a driver's license somehow both had the time and energy to drive you there. And I was even the oldest, so it's not like I could rely on an older sibling or something for help here. If you're a younger Pokemon fan than me, not even necessarily by very much, you might not know the true suffering of this, because these days, they've honestly made them really easy to get a lot of the time. A lot of them are just distributed over Wi-Fi as mystery gifts, but you've got to remember that my first generation of Pokemon was the first time Wi-Fi was even a thing for Pokemon. I remember getting my DS and hooking it up to our house's Wi-Fi, and I thought I was breaking some rules or some shit to access the GTS. We were not getting shit the way we do now, and we did not know how to get shit the way we do now. What's more, we didn't have the same kind of access to gaming news that kids today typically will. Back in my day with Gen 4, YouTube was literally still brand new, and I don't even think I was allowed on it at the time. Even when something did become available to us, through a mystery gift, a lot of people didn't know they were even supposed to be looking out for the news on distribution events, much less where to look for it. Nowadays, you turn on your Switch and it tells you if there's something going on. There was no news update in the DS home screen. There was nothing that popped up when you opened the game. Hell, even the more accessible form of this stuff still wasn't very accessible. Like, for example, in Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, you could get a Mew if you had save data from the Let's Go games on your Switch, and you could get a Jirachi if you had save data from Sword and Shield for some reason. You did not get shit for owning an old copy of a Pokemon game back in the day. At most, it would change up some of the wild spawns in your DS if it also had a GBA Pokemon game in the second slot while you were playing. But if you wanted like special legendaries, much less mythical Pokemon or whatever, you'd have to catch them yourself in that game and then pass them forward. On top of that, Gen 4 was a uniquely shitty generation to get into Pokemon if you cared about mythical Pokemon, because the number of them kind of exploded. Gen 1 had Mew, Gen 2 had Celebi, Gen 3 had Jirachi and Deoxys, but Gen 4 had Darkrai, Manaphy, Phione, I've said that name both ways now so no one can get mad at me, Shaman, and Arceus. I'm not saying that one both ways because one of them is definitively wrong. I'm sure there's a wrong way to say Phione too, but I don't care enough to look it up. It's barely a mythical Pokemon, like be real. What's more, while the previous mythical Pokemon typically had kind of stood alone, Mew's connected to Mewtwo, but Jirachi, Celebi, and Deoxys aren't really connected to the narrative or any other Pokemon in their games. They just got expanded on in movies and whatever. That wasn't as much the case in Gen 4. Darkrai was part of a duo with the legendary Pokemon Cresselia, and Arceus is the origin point for the Generations box legendaries, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. Darkrai actually comes up in the story of the Gen 4 games, if it's, a bit of a bit part. After you get the National Dex, you can go back to Canalave City and find Sailor Eldritch's son being afflicted by Darkrai's nightmares, but you can't do anything about it without the event. Deoxys is also kind of uniquely frustrating here because Veilstone City has 4 meteorites that only matter if you have a Deoxys already in your party, because those meteorites exist to change its form. Meanwhile, Shaman's event is basically the only reason Floroma Town exists, but you wouldn't even really know about that unless you got a legit Shaman that you could use to trigger the Gracidia Flower event. Otherwise, it's just a city about flowers. Now, there were a few mythical Pokemon in this generation that could be unlocked via other games. You could get a Mew from Pokemon Ranch on the Wii after transferring 1,000 Pokemon to that game and then transfer it back over directly. And you could get a Jirachi from a US copy of Pokemon Coliseum on the GameCube if you had the bonus disc and then transfer it to Ruby or Sapphire and then transfer it up to Gen 4. Or you could do the same with Celebi if you had the Japanese version for some reason and you weren't in Japan, I guess. A pretty understandable reason if you did live in Japan. And you get a Manaphy egg from Pokemon Ranger, which you transfer over to Gen 4, then hatch, then breed with Ditto to get Phione. This would require you to own at least 2 DS consoles, a Wii, and a GameCube, plus own at least 5 other games. Ranch, US Coliseum, Japanese Coliseum, Ranger, and one of the Gen 3 games. However, that still leaves Deoxys, Darkrai, Shaman, and Arceus. What about them? Well, Darkrai could be unlocked via Wi-Fi events. There was no in-game notice about them, and if you were a regular kid, you'd have no way of knowing about the fact that from August to November of 2009, you could hit up mystery gifts on your copy of Platinum to get the member card key item to go catch Darkrai yourself. But it was technically possible. Shaman was similar, with its event item, Oak's Letter, being distributed via Wi-Fi around the same time as Darkrai. If you wanted your Shaman to get access to its gimmick, the Gracidia Flower, which could change its form from regular to a flying grass sky form, you needed to get it via Oak's Letter specifically. Okay, so that leaves Deoxys and Arceus. And if we assume that you didn't have a special copy of Pokemon Coliseum from both Japan and America, which not only did you almost certainly not back then, you even more likely don't now because they are massively overpriced because of these Pokemon being exclusive to them, we can add Jirachi and Celebi to their ranks. What's their deal? Fuck you is their deal. These Pokemon were only made available through in-person events when I was a kid, and some of them you straight up could not receive in Canada. Some were made available via movie promotions, but my local theater in small town middle of buttfuck nowhere rural Alberta did not show the Pokemon movies, much less run promo for them. Some were made available through in-person distribution in stores that were either an hour or more away, or straight up didn't exist in my province or even my country. Some were made available during in-person tours that Pokemon would do. And wouldn't you believe it, those didn't come to rural Alberta either. As a kid, I didn't have a GameCube. We had a Wii, but I didn't know about that Mew, and I did have Ranger, so I did get Manaphy and Phione, but those were the only ones I could get legitimately. And I can hear a question from some of you right now. Legitimately? That's a weird qualifier to add there, and it's not the first time you've done it in this video. Does that mean you got them some other way? Part 2. Action Replay My Beloved. So, for those of you too young to remember this ancient artifact, Action Replay was a special piece of hardware that you could buy for your DS. There were other versions for other consoles, but we're just focusing on this for now. Action Replay would allow you to cheat. It was shaped like an oversized game cartridge that could fit your other games into the top of it. And what you would do is open Action Replay, put in some codes, and then launch your game through there. This was how you could get things like unlimited items, guaranteed shinies, walk through walls, 100% capture rate, capture enemy Pokemon, guaranteed perfect stats, guaranteed wild encounters with specific Pokemon, or even event items. Those last two were what I got Action Replay for. I begged for it, and my Uncle David, who presumably had no clue what it was, rest in peace, bought it for me for my birthday one year. From that point on, I was rolling in shiny legendaries and mythicals. My personal favorite was shiny Latias, if you're curious. The orange color is just really nice. I like the orange and white. My favorite Pokemon at the time included Shaman, Darkrai, and Jirachi as well, so of course I used this stuff to get them too. But remember, when it comes to Darkrai and Shaman in particular, the game knows how you're supposed to be able to get these Pokemon, and if you don't do it the right way, you can't fully utilize them. A Shaman that was caught by throwing away the right number of Pokeballs and Master Balls would not unlock the Gracidia flower, and no amount of walking through walls or whatever else would count either. You had to get it via Oak's Letter. So you'd have to hack in Oak's Letter for Shaman, the Member's Guard for Darkrai, and the Azure Flute for Arceus. And that last one is actually especially interesting because in a weird twist, the actual Azure Flute events were never distributed because I think that Nintendo or Game Freak thought that it was just too complicated for kids, which is weird because it really isn't, but whatever. Anyways, this meant that only kids who cheated at the time were able to get this special encounter with Arceus. Cheaters do in fact prosper, provided they have uncles willing to drop $40 for their birthdays anyways. Regardless, that's how I got my mythical Pokemon. Cheating. I had tons of Jirachis and Celebes and Mews and Deoxyses and Shamans and Darkrai's and Arceuses and Manaphy's and Fionans, but no one really cares because everyone has a ton of those. So what are you complaining about? I can hear you asking. And the answer to that is that I still don't think this is very fun. The fun part of rare Pokemon is putting in the work to get them, not just the passive act of having them. A while back, I was actually working on getting a living dex in Pokemon Home, and eventually, when it came to the mythical Pokemon, I just gave up and paid a couple bucks to someone on eBay to just give me all of them so I could stop stressing about how I'd do it. And is that cheating? Yeah, obviously. It's also not very fun. I justify it by saying that I could never have gotten those ones legitimately and that I'm not going to have my goal ruined by not living in Tokyo in 2009 or some bullshit, but that doesn't make it more fun to have gotten them this way. Like getting the Regis in Gen 3 wasn't fun because you now have these super expressive boulders in your PC that honked at you like distorted geese. It was because of the whole journey to unlock them, right? Like, was it kind of a bullshit quest? Duh. Was it remotely accessible to the average kid who didn't know what to look up to figure it out? Obviously not. The average child would not only need to know Braille, but also figure out an incredibly specific set of instructions that were themselves actually pretty vague, but they needed really specific conditions to be met to get all three of them. Mythical Pokemon are meant to be so rare that it is borderline unconfirmed that they really exist in universe. Of course, we know they exist because they take up Pokédex space, especially in the national decks. So instead, for most kids, those empty spaces just taunt you. It's this shitty reminder that even if you love Pokemon and you try your best to catch them all and everything, it still won't be enough because you don't live in a special enough place. A complete Pokédex is for kids in Japan and like 7 cities across America and Western Europe. Not you. And that sucks. It creates a lot of FOMO for kids who can't do anything about it other than buy third-party software to try and cheat it in, which robs the mythical Pokemon of their whole purpose in the process. And the fact that most people will never encounter them also means that you can't really incorporate them into the stories of the games. Darkrai getting referenced in the quest to catch Cresselia kinda is really the closest you'd get. And that sucks, because a lot of these mythical Pokemon had cool concepts and stories that just got wasted because they could only ever be incorporated into the movies at most. And even then, a lot of kids never saw the movies because they didn't get theatrical releases everywhere. I was a pretty big Pokemon fan. I didn't even know Pokemon movies existed until I randomly saw one in a Blockbuster one day when I was like 10 or 12. When it comes to the games, the best example of the lost opportunity of all of this is actually kind of Celebi, because the Celebi event with the spiky-eared Pichu and Heart Gold and Soul Silver is really fun and special, and then that sort of thing just never really happens again. But the premise of this video isn't just that they sucked when I was a kid. They did, but if anything, they're kind of failing at their own purpose more now. Part 3. The present day. The core issue with mythical Pokemon is that the reason for existing is primarily as a promotional item. A very strong, very rare, often very cute or cool Pokemon that almost nobody else will have. And look, I have no problem with rare Pokemon being part of the equation. I don't think that every Pokemon needs to be just handed to everyone. I actually have argued the opposite. And I think it's fair to make people work harder to get rarer ones. The problem is that the rarity is being determined by things like geographical positioning in the real world based on your proximity to a major population center in Japan, America, or some parts of Europe more than anything else. Like, it would honestly be less frustrating if it was just purely luck-based than that sort of in-person distribution model. However, you might point out that modern events are often done entirely online, and nowadays mythical Pokemon are distributed in much more accessible ways. This is true, and it's a good thing, but it leads to another couple of issues. The first is something I mentioned before, namely that a lot of mythical Pokemon are really interesting, but their status as mythical stops that interesting nature from ever being engaged with. There's nothing really fascinating about logging in, getting a mystery gift, and now you have God and also Edgy Nightmare God on the team. It robs them of their mystery and gravitas when they're just kind of passed out. This is something that Legends Arceus actually did really well, and I hope it continues for future Legends games as well. Pokemon benefits from using these mythical Pokemon to not only expand the narrative in the way that spin-offs like the Mystery Dungeon games have done really well, but also for being a real opportunity to create some unique challenges. Having the mythical Pokemon hidden behind the kinds of puzzles and challenges that the old school Regis had would be great. You could ramp up the difficulty, randomize things, and otherwise put in the effort to make it so that having one of these Pokemon was a symbol of luck, skill, and perseverance, rather than just, you live near a EB Games. But what about rewarding people who collect rare Pokemon or creating promotional materials, you might ask? And to that, I'd say just give Pikachu another hat or whatever, I don't care. This is a game for children, not for adult collectors, and I think that's something that gets lost in a lot of these discussions, frankly. I don't mind promotional Pokemon being unique, rare variants. Pikachu in a hat is one option, I guess, but you can do shiny legendaries or even mythicals if you want. The problem is that for a franchise where gotta catch 'em all is the slogan and a core part of the concept, it's kind of bullshit to make it impossible to do that even if you owned every single game. This is especially true now that it's no longer possible to transfer up from the older games, and Dexit has meant that it's not like every Pokemon can be transferred into the new games at all, meaning that methods like the Colosseum Jirachi or Ranger Manaphy are locked off forever. And the threshold for that is always advancing. The deaths of Pokemon Transfer and Pokemon Bank were the first big extinction level events that cut off dozens of old rare Pokemon, but Pokemon Home will almost certainly eventually go that way too. I don't think it's unfair to make mythical Pokemon extremely challenging to catch, but I do think that making it challenging on the basis of where you live sucks, as does not making it a challenge at all and just handing them out. And I know I mentioned it before, but it especially sucks for kids since they have literally no control over any of that, and even more so for kids from poorer families. If your parents have the money and free time to be able to afford to drive you a long distance on some random day just so you can get a Jirachi, absolutely more power to you. People sometimes get kind of weird about it when I talk about class stuff because they think that I'm trying to shame people who do have the money to do these things, but I'm not. I want to make that abundantly clear. But it's also not really in the spirit of gotta catch 'em all for kids to not be able to do so because their family has one car for two working parents and they're not able to spare 3 hours to drive into the city on a workday for it. It exacerbates the issues around class that have really permeated Pokemon in the modern day, especially when it comes to stuff like trading cards, where adults with disposable income have made it functionally impossible for kids to just engage in the hobby normally at scale. Because even if your parents can afford to buy you Pokemon cards or get you into Target at the ass crack of dawn to make sure they can beat the scalpers, what fun are Pokemon cards by yourself? What happens if none of the other kids at school can have any? What happens if you're the only kid who can get the cool mythical Pokemon? It breeds resentment and FOMO in the same way that microtransaction heavy games like Fortnite do, just with extra steps and even less accessibility. After all, if you're the only one on the playground with Darkrai, you're going to end up in a position where you either have to, 1, have a massive advantage in every battle so nobody wants to play with you, or 2, you're going to have to stop using it so other people are going to be willing to battle with you. Beyond that, many mythical Pokemon are genuinely just really cool, and it is a massive waste to their designs. I love Jirachi and Darkrai and Shaman, but you've also got newer ones like Diancie and Volcanion and Marshadow and Zeraora who deserve more actual attention. Although I think from what I've seen online, people don't like Volcanion. I don't understand what you people are on about. I think it looks goofy as hell and I love it. Treating these Pokemon like they're the equivalent of those weird Egyptian Mew promo cards sucks, because it not only locks kids out of completing their dexes in entirely unavoidable ways, it voluntarily gives up on a really straightforward way to add more post-game depth to the games and expand the narrative in more interesting ways. Mythical Pokemon, as they were, was always a bad idea, but at least in the old days I could see why they wanted to do it. Nowadays though, there's just better alternatives that don't have the downsides for players in the games themselves that the current approach to mythical Pokemon does. There's also not the same hardware limitations of the old days that might justify not having an expansive postgame or something that can capitalize on the mythical Pokemon. Deoxys in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is another good example of this. But every time Game Freak finds a cool way to use their mythicals, they immediately forget about it for the sequel, which is weird and really tedious and frustrating. And what's more, it's also just generally shitty for the consumer to never really have the circumstances created where mythical Pokemon feel both appropriately rare and important, where their impact is what it should be for Pokemon of their status. The Legends franchise has so far been really good for this, and I'm hoping that ZA will continue the trend from Arceus, because it would be a genuinely good change for consumers, both in terms of getting to fully experience the game and all the cool Pokemon on offer without needing to live in the 6 cities Nintendo is willing to acknowledge exist outside of Japan, and in terms of being able to meaningfully integrate their stories and concepts into the narrative to enrich the experience. And ultimately, that's kind of part of what it comes down to. Mythical Pokemon were a bad idea for consumers right from the jump, and they've only become a more anti-consumer practice as time has gone on. Moving in the direction of embracing them as a part of the games rather than as an exclusionary promotional gimmick that benefits certain players based on proximity, class, and age is a pro-consumer move, and it's one that I hope moves into the main series even more as a result of how positively people have received the Legends spin-offs. Thankfully, Game Freak is known for being like super pro-consumer and making things more accessible, not less, when they have access to technology to do so. So I'm sure they'll make that change any day now. Surely. Right? Anyways, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This is going to be the last video before the 3-year anniversary Donathon starts, and for reasons that will be clear in about 2 weeks, maybe a little less, it sort of feels like the end of an era for me. Speaking of, here's the schedule for the upcoming videos. October 4th, the sequel makeover, how Overwatch handled updating its character designs. October 5th, making a mascot, ruining a character. October 12th, what it means to hate a game for content. October 19th, I gave myself body dysmorphia with my VTubing model because I'm stupid, what now? October 26th, Gen AI is a society-wide prisoner's dilemma and we are not going to solve it in time. October 31st, I can't enjoy horror and it makes me miserable. It's going to be a busy October, followed by the Process of Elimination video in November, plus the October Members' Choice video, or maybe Members' Choice video is plural since I usually end up doing an extra one as a Donathon reward. Speaking of, those rewards will be revealed on October 4th in that video and in streams on that day, so if you're curious, make sure to tune in for it. This video was actually a Members' Choice video from back in June. I promise I'm almost caught up on the backlog, and if you really liked it, you should consider becoming a channel member. Channel members give $5 a month on YouTube or Patreon to vote for one topic every month, including all of these topics from this year. The next poll will start on October 1st between these 4 topics. How Buried Stars gets social media toxicity right. This video would be a return to Buried Stars focusing specifically on how it portrays social media toxicity through its Twitter stand-in Fader, and how that toxicity impacts each of the characters differently. If you're thinking, hey, I feel like I've been hearing about this topic for a while now, what's up with that? You're not wrong. It has officially been in 7 polls across the last full calendar year as of October, having first appeared in November of 2024. The only reason it hasn't been eliminated is because it's been taking second either in rank or in preference for every poll it's been in since April, and also because I really like it and I'm hoping that one day the membership will finally see sense and actually pick it. Anyways, what does it mean to perform poorly? This video would be about how we evaluate performance and how our understanding of performance metrics is counterintuitive, both in gaming spaces and beyond. What's the price of a game? This video would be about the discussion people are having about the price of Switch games, AAA games, and indie games, focusing on what it even means to try and decide what the price of a game should be. Oblivion, Skyrim, and how limitations can make games better. This video would argue that Oblivion's relatively more restrictive gameplay and mechanics actually allowed the player to make more choices and explore more freedom than Skyrim's open-ended approach to skills, combat, and progression. If you want to vote for one of these 4 topics, like I said, make sure to become a channel member on either YouTube or Patreon at the links in the description down below. Lastly, thank you very much to all my channel members, both now and from back when this video was selected. At the $25 Elite membership tier, thank you to Adele and Robot Juice. At the $10 Premium membership tier, thank you to Tortoise, Angitenar, Ghostbat, Bailey Nichols, Cavi Corbin, and Corey Anders. At the $5 membership tier, thank you to Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Alex Stone, Nemo the Survivor, Dextiny, Minikyu, Cadence, Marsh Alice, Gavos, Crimson Cyclo, Corey, MV, The Only Enigma, Good Guy Luis, Mariah, Amon Dadley, Meep Cube, Noisy Pitta, Harv, Marcy Gaskill, Deku _ Safon, Lala the Bambi, JMD Toaster, Ginkgo, Teo Tamara, Monica Linnell, Please Like Me, and Puddinsis. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or you just clicked on this video out of curiosity, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.